you just turn the machine off? I'll sort it out a bit later.
Not sure you're taking it seriously, honey. Wait.
Okay.
Let's see you later.
Have a good day.
Super. Great. Yeah, so just to give a bit of background for those that aren't familiar with BSI. So BSI is the UK's national standards body. We develop consensus-based standards for UK industry across all sectors through our technical committees, made up of a range of technical experts. So our committees also feed into the development of international standards through ISO, as well as European standards through our membership with CEN and CENELEC. So you might, hopefully you're aware that BSI has been working closely with Innovate UK and Innovate UK EDGE to support new and emerging areas and technologies. So over the past couple of years, we've been delivering this toolkit program to support business growth advisors and SMEs on standards and the role of standards for business and industry. So our program's really focused on three key strands. So providing free access to standards through BSOL, British Standards Online. So if you haven't already, you can register for an account and have access to all of those standards. Also delivering courses across a range of topics that are important to small businesses and their growth, including this one on supply chain management, as well as offering information through an online webpage with key materials and content on hot topics. But yeah, for now, I'll pass over to Frank and John to start today's session.
Thank you, Amy. Let me see if I can make this work now so everyone will be able to see the slides. Is that working?
Yeah.
Yep. Oh, good. Okay, that's the first success of the day. Good morning, everyone. Just to start with, I'd just like John and I to introduce ourselves. I'll start and then let John speak a little bit. I actually began my career many years ago in pharmaceutical research and development. And then I actually joined BSI back in 1990. In my pharmaceutical days, I worked both in the UK and in Switzerland for Ciba-Geigy. But trust me, I do no longer claim to be anything like a good chemist. Since joining BSI, I gained a lot of experience working in a number of roles, and I go through a couple of those roles so you get a feel for my general background. I was the regional director for BSI Management Systems, so the certification part of BSI in Northern Europe, which encompassed France, Germany, the Netherlands, all around continental Europe. Prior to that, I'd been the operations director for continental Europe, Middle East, African region, where I delivered all the assessments or arranged for all the assessments in that region to be delivered. I'd been the global technology manager for BSI, which is where I started my career and where I first met John, as I'm sure he'll allude to in a second, looking at what was then OHS 18001, now 45,000 that we'll talk about, and helped to bring that into the arena. I was Global Technical and Operational Delivery Manager for BSI, looking at the integrity of the products that we delivered around the world, including kite mark and all of the different standards that we had. And at the very end, I was the UK and Ireland Product Certification Director for BSI, responsible for the UK product certification, again, including products like kite mark, CE mark, UK CE mark. Over the years, I've sat on a number of standards committees representing the certification industry. They include, it's not an exclusive list, I've been through a few over the years, but 9001, 14001, BS 95009, the trust standard, 45,000 for health and safety management systems. I also was involved in the COVID flex standard that we produced during the pandemic. And probably my favorite one, I was a member of the BS 11000, which is now ISO 44001 for collaborative working. I was in that from the very start, and I developed the schemes that we developed as a result of that, which is interesting because I've now gone on a course. I retired from BSI at the end of last year, and I'm now the Chief Executive at the Institute of Collaborative Working. The Institute of Collaborative Working is a not-for-profit organisation that supports our members in using collaboration within supply chains to create better commercial outcomes, to work to deliver social value to the communities that we all serve and are part of, to address sustainability challenges. And I'd say to any organisation, try getting to net zero scope 3 alone. And those of you who are part of large supply chains, I'm sure, will be working in this area in the future. And also to foster a more diverse and inclusive organisation by encouraging organisations to work together. I've known and worked with my good friend, John Osborne, for many years. And John, why don't you give a quick overview of your background before we move on?
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. As Frank said, I worked with Frank in BSI. I retired from BSI a few years ago now, and have since been working as a consultant, independent consultant, and also working with the Institute for Collaborative Working with Frank. My early career was in fact, all of my career has been in sales and marketing and commercial roles. The first part of the career was working through distribution channels in the construction industry and DIY markets with a range of plumbing and shower products. I then joined BSI, and my first role with BSI was actually about helping organisations export. So it was a business called Technical Help to Exporters. So we were interested in advising organisations on what they needed to do to comply from a standards and regulatory and compliance perspective in overseas markets. I then had roles in the standards business and ended up as sales and marketing director for the standards division, and even there working through distributors as part of that activity for standards and intellectual property. After that, I joined the training business and was responsible for developing the training activity within BSI. That period, I've also had responsibility for working with standards like ISO 9000, as well as Frank's mentioned, 44001, and getting that into the UK and European marketplace. So I think that pretty much brings me up to date, but very much the focus is being sales and marketing and commercial activities.
All right, thanks for that, John. I can make this slide progress. So, workshop objectives today. What we wanted to do with you really was to try and work in 3 areas. We've titled them Understand, Introduce and Recognise. Understand that supply chains and the resilience in supply chain is so critical in today's environment. And then to initiate the process for you and to get you thinking and maybe aware a little more of how standards can be used by organisations to manage and improve the resilience of supply chains and the supply chains that your organisations and your suppliers are part of and depend on so much. Clearly, if we're able to do that and improve the way we work in our supply chains and get better, we can achieve an awful lot of things. You know, we can improve ROIs, and I alluded a little earlier as well to looking at some of the sustainability challenges that we have. And then recognise that standards can really improve in that area and can really help in that area, and how they can identify those critical success factors, and then you can get some real returns. I'd also like to talk to you and show you today, and just to maybe start the process of letting you know about how standards and the other services that we provide in BSI can support your organisations. You know, we are a recognised source and a valuable source of information. And even though I left at the end of last year, you will find out that I continually refer to us as we, because after 32 years, it's a little difficult to believe that I'm no longer employed by BSI. So excuse me if I do that, but all the way through, I'll probably refer to us as we, because I feel very much part of this organisation. So those are the key things, all about understand, introduce and recognise. And I hope that you get a feel for today we'll talk about a number of standards, very much in some cases briefly and in some cases just to mention them. John and I do not profess to be experts in all of them, but hopefully we'll give you an indication of the nature of standards, the type of standards, and the value that you can get from them, and the role that they play in helping you support your supply chain and your supply chain partners. So sort of contents today. Well, we've also started it, but we'll look at what we mean by supply chain and its resilience. What are the key influence driving the requirement for resilience within modern supply chains, and how might they evolve? And the ways to achieve that resilience, and the things that the factors that people might look at, which I suspect will open up opportunities, particularly in the SME area, and so that you can be ready to capitalize on those. And then we're also going to talk today about the standards that are relevant and that we believe can support your activities. At the very end, I want to have a quick word about product standards and product certification, because it is important and it can provide an enormous level of assurance, but it's perhaps an area that, with all the talk we get on systems in standards today, can be overlooked a little bit. But product certification can be a valuable differentiator for many organisations, and provide assurance to others. And then at the very end, I'd like to just talk very shortly about getting involved in, and you getting involved in, standardisation. The more people that are involved, the better, and then to look at further sources of information. So we thought it'd be nice, and besides which, after starting off, it will give me time to have a quick sip of my water. But it would be nice to get some thoughts from you as to what you hope to get from the session and why. And to be honest, even if we don't deliver that to you today, this will help us going forward as we improve and adapt the materials and content that we've got for you. So can I ask you, just for very quickly, and while I take a sip of water, just to put in the chat some of the things that you hope to get from today. And we'll take a look at those, John and I, in the break, and certainly afterwards as well, just to make sure that we're delivering them. And if things come up, John, in the chat that I don't see as I'm on this view, then you can maybe bring them up as well as we go through. Yeah. So let me just give you all just a second to put something in the chat, if you will, please.
Yeah. No, it's worth mentioning, Frank, as you said, this is actually the first of 4 sessions on this subject, so it will enable us to use some of that information and perhaps adapt the subsequent presentations.
And I'm sure we'll be back for future sessions in the future, which will maybe help to adapt those as well and to formulate those. So hopefully that's ongoing and as to some extent happened. So I'll move to the next slide. So when people think of standards, they immediately, and I hope it's my role from 32 years, they immediately think about certification. But actually, that's only part of the story. And actually, quite a small part of the story when you look at the huge numbers of standards that are actually out there. The greater majority of standards have absolutely no certification scheme whatsoever associated with them. They're often guidance standards, codes of practice, etc. Or, in many cases, they support the implementation of management systems or processes to help you support your business. In many cases, they define the principles that support the actual standard. And I always think they're worth reading. One of the standards that I had to work with in my product certification days, as an example, was 17065, which was the rules by which product certification operated. And we'll talk about that a little bit at the end. But actually, the principles for 17065 are established and set out in ISO 17067. And those principles, it's very difficult to understand why there are requirements in 17065 if you don't know what the principles that are based on are in 17067. And in fact, one of the things that we did when we wrote ISO 44001 was to produce the ISO 44000 standard, which contains all those principles. So if you're looking at that for collaborative working, then I really recommend you look at the principles as well, and they might be the best starting point. And let's see, some of the standards that we have support internal auditors, external auditors, implementation. They provide guidance and support. So they may just give you a source of good practice or reference material that might help you in either building your systems, or if you have a particular challenge or a particular requirement or need, maybe from a supplier or from a customer, They could be a really source of material that can help you address that need and give you some good sound ideas. So don't think it's all about certification. It absolutely isn't. The greater majority of standards are there to help and support your businesses. And of course, standards are not written by BSI employees. I never sat in the standards committee representing BSI. I always sat there representing an industry sector. And so that information is put together and written by specialists and experts from the sector or the discipline. And I'll say it at the end, but I'll say it now as well. Please get involved. The more people that are involved, the better and the more rounded the standards are.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying, sorry, Frank, I was just going to say that I think it's worth just emphasising that point about standards and certification, because it's my experience, a lot of organisations, particularly with standards that have got certification attached, like the environmental standards and quality standards, people don't use them because they don't want to go through the certification process, or they think it's expensive. And therefore they miss out on a lot of the really good advice that's actually in the standards document. And of course, I always say that you've got two decisions to make with standards. One is to buy the standard, and then the other is to actually get certification. And they are different. They are different decisions that businesses need to make. But please try and encourage your customers to not or to use the standard, because it contains some really good guidance. And then think about certification as a separate activity.
Yeah, and actually, John, many of the standards, the certification standards, do have guidance within them as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Annexes at the back and
Yeah.
useful tools.
Yeah.
And all British standards and ISO standards are arrived at via consensus. That can be both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on your point of view. But again, as I said earlier, I would encourage all of you to see how you can get involved in standards development and writing. It's good to contribute, and we are in BSI as keen to get as diverse a group as possible involved, and of course, as much expertise as we can. In my view, the better the standard committee, the better the standard. One piece of advice, and it builds a little bit on what John just said. If you read a standard and find there's something there that is relevant to you or your organisation, but you don't do it, make sure you know why. Because in the main, standards just reflect what is good practice, and they're written by people who are generally practitioners in the sector. So in reality, they reflect what is pretty much established practice. Not always, but pretty much. So if you're not doing it, make sure you know why you're not doing it. And in most of the standards we refer to today, they really tell you how to do something. They often provide guidance and support, or, and in many of the management system standards, they want you to deliver a particular desired outcome and to be involved in the process that does that. So they don't always tell you how to do it. They tell you what they require your or want your processes to achieve. So do think about joining BSI, and at the very least, you'll get a heavy discount when you buy standards. Also, things that sort of confuse people about standards, I find, and John, you probably found this in your experience, is that people look at the different types of standards. A PAS, a publicly available specification, a BS, or an ISO. To be honest, those differences, are, in my view anyway, are more about how that standard is being produced as to what the contents of the standard is as well. A simple way of looking at standards for me is that if it's a specification, like 9001, it has lots of shalls in the document. And if it says that, then probably someone who wrote it probably thought there should be a certification scheme of some form was required in that area. If it has a lot of shoulds, then that's good advice and guidance, and it's probably to act there and be a source of guidance or education, and to act as a point of reference. Now, I've probably oversimplified it, and that's sort of my personal view, but I suspect I'm not too far wrong. John, any more on that area before we move to the
No, I
next
don't think
slide?
so, Frank. I think we've covered that area enough.
Right. Lovely. So the first one we thought we'd look at to give you some indication of the standards that we thought might be of interest to you is BS 65000 2022. I first came across this a number of years ago when it was, I think, the 2014 version. I can't remember correctly. It's and it's a standard that focuses on organisational resilience. and it's a guidance standard. So there is no certification scheme that I'm aware of here. And what it really does, and one of the reasons why we put this up front, because it very clearly identifies that supply chain resilience is actually a real key and component and integral part of overall organizational resilience. It identifies the principal components of resilience to enable an organization to review its resilience and implement and measure improvements. Now, it identifies and recommends good practices that are already defined out there. It's actually a code of practice, so it provides lots of guidance. Going back to my earlier point, there's no certification scheme here, or certainly, as I say, none that I'm aware of, but it is such a useful document and such a useful standard. And so I do recommend you take a look at it. And those of you who are part of our supply chains, just look and see, the adoption of this standard, the knowledge of this standard, speaking about to your customers and other supply chain partners about this standard, really might help you to provide confidence to them in your ability to be a resilient part of that supply chain. It provides guidance and recommendations on topics like what constitutes organizational resilience, the defining attributes and the practical measures that we should consider and that can be taken to address the topic. It helps to clarify organizational resiliences for senior management, the top leadership in an organization. Just going through it will help you identify the principal parts or components of resilience to enable an organization to review how resilient it is and to implement and measure improvements so you can get better. It recommends good practice and existing standards and disciplines that you might want to look together. But most critically for me anyway, it brings together the operational resilience and information resilience as part of an overall organizational resilience. And you can see from the model there, and we'll see a lot of models today in this presentation, that it talks about product, process, people, talks about you being agile, robust and adaptive. And of course, it's linked on plan, do, check out. So it has all this continual improvement, this stepwise improvement to that is a focus of so many standards. So I think it's a really good point of reference to start your journey in standards and to look at your supply chain and whether you're looking to make your supply chain or your organization more resilient. I think it's useful for you, particularly in the tendering process as well, where you can provide lots of reassurance to your customers.
Yeah, it's worth mentioning, Frank, that BSI in recent years have done an annual survey on organisational resilience, and that's available as a download on the BSI website. Or I'm sure if you request it, we can send you a copy, a PDF copy. And that looks at all of the issues on that slide. But as we will mention later, when you look at supply chain resilience in that report, and certainly the 21 version of the report, I think it was 89% of respondents said that they'd suffered supply chain disruption because of the COVID or because of the pandemic, which is understandable. But it just goes to highlight, the critical part that supply chains play in an organization. And interestingly, some of the newer organizations, younger organizations, suffered more than some of the older, more established organizations. And I think there might be two reasons. One is it might be more mature suppliers putting a bit of pressure on them, but also it might be just not having alternative sources and supplies within their supply chain to cope with the problems that COVID threw up, which we'll talk a little bit about later.
Thanks, John. And everyone now realizes that you're much better at me than reading reports, of course. So supply chains, in its simplest form, a supply chain is the activities required to deliver goods or services to a customer. And you can have a look at that model. And what we tried to point out there is how global supply chains can be as well. When looking at your supply chain, and any supply chain that you're part of, you've got to look, upstream to your suppliers and their supply of raw materials or components, and then downstream to your organization's activities through to delivery of the goods and the services to the end consumer. And of course, many of you will be a part of quite large supply chains. We've sort of really focused here a little bit on traditional manufacturing, and the activity of interfacing with suppliers is generally supported by procurement, and there's a lot of procurement standards, and we'll maybe mention some of them later. And then the materials will pass through goods and warehouses in their products through to manufacturing site and onto the finished goods warehouses. This activity is the core activity of operations management through the supply chain. But logistics play such an integral role in the movement, both of inbound materials and outbound goods, to make sure that the finished product gets to where it needs to get to the final and end user. And logistics is often a forgotten part of supply chains. So, I think we're encouraging you here to look at all elements of the supply chain, and then think about all the services and products and services that come together to form the overall consumer service of the finished product. And think of all the things as well can disrupt that supply chain. And certainly in recent years, we've seen logistical issues have been a big factor in that. And of course, when you know about your supply chain, you can see how that supply chain network comes together, and you can start to understand the flow of materials and the information and how complex that can be. So it's absolutely vital that an organisation understands its supply chain in detail and the interdependencies within it. It can then identify, and you can identify the critical points, the areas of high risk, and risk is something we'll talk about. And then you can start to develop mitigation strategies. And you can then use some of the standards that we'll talk about and with your supply chain partners as a key tool in the development of those mitigation strategies. John, any points here that you want to expand on there?
Only just to emphasise the fact that it's that of course it's a global issue these days because supply chains are global. Absolutely crucial just to recognise that, and also I think in the problems that we've had recently, organisations have recognised that it's not just important to understand and have relationships with their tier 1 suppliers, but also to get behind that and understand about the tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers because they affect that supply chain as well.
Yeah,
so
all part of that critical.
Yeah, it is part of really diving into, particularly from the supply side, diving into your supply chains to understand, where your suppliers are getting their supplies from,
and how you fit in the supply chains of your customers as well.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. And so, supply chain resilience is critical, and we have seen in recent years the sort of things that have caused real problems in our supply chains. Unexpected events that have come along to cause issues. The pandemic, we've alluded to it already, and we all know the issues there. I'm going to talk about one of them a little later, I think. Climate change and the effects of climate change on our weather patterns, the more severe weather that we're getting, can have real impacts. Ukraine, who on earth a couple of years ago thought we'd have a war in Europe, and the disruption to supply chains that has caused. I certainly, before the war in Ukraine, had no idea of the role that Ukraine played in food to different parts of the world and other things. Brexit and the problems that have caused there, and the increased bureaucracy that we've had, labour shortages, inflation, and that's had a real effect on supply chains, and of course inflation has a knock-on effect onto, as we've seen in many areas, onto wages. Material shortages and chips that we know for the automotive and aerospace industries are being a big issue. And then just pure unexpected demand that maybe all of the above can cause. I have got no idea what the next blip is going to be that's going to cause shortages or problems in the supply chain. And we're only at the start of 2023 at the moment. But the only thing that I can tell you with any certainty about 2023 is that there's going to be uncertainties in it. So get ready, I think is what I would say. And then there'll be changes to forthcoming regulation that may affect your supply chain. So here. Now, I don't claim to be an expert. John might in a moment, but I don't.
Pretty not.
But there are a few changes in the pipeline. There's the EU proposed Supply Chain Act of 2023, which is focused on larger organisations. But trust me, if it applies to larger organisations, they're going to try and push that down through their supply chain. There are apparently similar laws already existing in Switzerland, France, and Germany. So this is really taking some of those national laws that those countries have adopted and moving them out across Europe. And we will be affected, I have no doubt. And there'll be far more, and there are already environmental sustainability and governance requirements, and I have absolutely no doubt that there'll be more as well. John, are there any more coming through that you're aware of, or any more you want to
Not
talk
that
about
I'm
there?
aware of there, Frank, but I just think all the things that you mentioned earlier in terms of the risks, then I think countries have realised that there are risks to their performance, and therefore they need to put in place legislation in order to ensure that companies are behaving in appropriate ways. Yeah,
absolutely. So what we're sort of going to do over the next few slides is take you through standards and some of the standards that we think can support you in your supply chain, and we've sort of divided these into three sections really. One on assessing the risks to your supply chain, one on partner and collaboration, and which is part of your mitigation strategy, I guess, to some extent. Or mitigation strategies that your other supply chain partners may wish to adopt and you may wish to become part of. And then managing your ESG areas through things like environment, quality, information security, health and safety, and business continuity. So those are the three areas that we're going to talk about. In the first one, we're going to talk about supply chain security, which is ISO 28000, and on BS ISO 31000-2018, which is a guidance standard, a very useful document again, and again we'll talk more about that in a few moments. So ISO 28000, there's a model that we've put up there, and it's sort of plan, do, check, act. Looking at, you'll set your policy, risk-based. So you're conducting risk assessment, and then it's all about doing it, implementing and operating, and then measuring, checking and taking corrective actions, and then looking to improve, review and improve. That takes you into that cycle of continual improvement, that stepwise approach to getting better. It's all about supply chain security. It helps organizations to better assess their risks. It's security, it's risk-based. And to look at where security risks may come in and may cause problems, theft, terrorism, etc. And also to identify and help them manage new risks as they emerge, and then to implement controls to manage those potential security threats. It's full of good advice. And because it's based on Plan, Do, Check, Act, it will very easily fit into your established management systems if you as an organization choose to deploy it. There is, as far as I'm aware, no certification schemes readily available. That's not to say you couldn't get one from somewhere, but there are no readily available ones. But it's got lots of good advice and good guidance, and it's a ready reference document, I would suggest. And the key point, if you're certified to 9001, then this is a standard that you could easily build into your management system to be used by your people on a day-to-day basis. You don't need to certify to it. It's just a really useful document. And it is based on this risk-based approach, which really helps you focus on the key areas of your management system that you want to look at. John, have I forgotten anything more we need to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I just think it's worth, I guess it underpins the in a sense, the process we're going through here, which is by, start out by, as you said, start out by doing the supply chain risk assessment, then put in place your mitigation strategies, and then continually monitor those and improve them as time goes on. But yeah, so
absolutely.
carry on, Frank.
And actually, when you're doing that risk assessment, this key, and the key risk assessment, as John says, is absolutely critical. It really tells you where to focus your efforts, because at the end of the day, you know, we all know we can't do everything, so we have to do the things that are most important to us. So it really says to start with this risk assessment. Make sure you then know where you're gonna focus. And what we're trying to do here is just give some ideas. This is not a definitive list, but you know, things like people skills and competencies, cyber security risks, material shortages, changes in demand, seasonal changes, different economic conditions in what countries you know your supply chain partners based in, what the situations might they have that are different to here, pandemics, goodness knows, we'll be talking about that forever now, competitor activity, price changes. You know, if suddenly raw material prices change, the effects that can have on your business. And can you do anything in some cases? You know, maybe you can't do anything in some situations. Regulatory changes, trying to be aware of what's coming up. You can do that by your different bodies that you might be aware of, trade associations, chambers of commerce, etc. That will help you be aware of those things in advance. So lots and lots of things. But remember, please, that a risk assessment is not something that you do and forget. It's a really dynamic activity. You know, so many things when I got into 18,001, now 45, many years ago, when John and I first started working together, I'd see risk assessments that people done 5 and 6 years earlier, and they get them out and they show me these risk assessments that I'd be so proud of. You know, a risk assessment done 5 or 6 years ago is useful, but it's not that useful. Things change, circumstances, context, people, technology. So will that risk assessment. And the circumstances change, and circumstances are the big thing, then the quantification of that risk, and therefore the result and the actions to mitigate the risk and where the risk occurred will change. So don't just do a risk assessment and put it in the drawer and think you've done well. Have a program, make sure you're continuing to review it. And just think of, and I'm going to talk about the pandemic here, and I don't really want to talk about it too much, but I was at the Department of Health recently, actually, for another issue. I didn't ask them the question, but I bet if I'd asked the Department of Health, they'd done a risk assessment of the possible PPE shortage in October 2020, they would have considered it pretty low risk. And 6 months later, trust me, when I was involved in CE marking of masks and gowns, that was a completely different story. So don't forget, keep an eye on your risk assessments. They can change. So wanted to also now talk about 28,000. I mean, people can read that and I can take a drink of water. John, do you want to say anything on ISO 28,000 here and some of the things we talk about there?
Not really. In essence, just that, and I think it applies to a lot of the standards we're going to go through. It's about, you know, adopting standards like this and being able to demonstrate that you have adopted the principles. Gives confidence. Essentially, it's going to give confidence to your supply chain, but they will also deliver you some internal benefits as you adopt them as well, and hopefully some cost savings in the process. But also, it gives you a framework against which you might want to assess your supply chain and ask them about their approach to supply chain risk assessment and whether or not they've got these things in place. So it's something that if you adopt, it gives your clients adopt, it gives your customers confidence. It's also a way of assessing your supply chain as well and your supply chain partners.
And I think those things are things that John references there. You know, whether it be achieving cost savings, allows you to focus on the areas of greatest concerns, facilitates trades and helps you get more business. All of the standards that we'll talk about today, if deployed properly, do one really important thing, is that they provide confidence to stakeholders. And I think that's a key thing. And we're not going to keep putting this slide up after every one that we talk about today, but I think a key thing is that they do, and all of the standards we'll talk about today will help you provide confidence to one or other of your stakeholders. Oops, sorry about that. And the other standard we wanted to talk to you about in this area was ISO 31000, and this is risk management guidelines. It's a document used by people who create and protect value in organizations by managing risk, making decisions, setting achieving objectives, and improving performance. This is a standard, again, it's a guideline standard, but it's designed to be used by organizations of all types and all sizes, looking at internal factors, external influences and factors, and how it can support them in achieving their objectives. It's really a governance standard. So all the standards we'll talk about today talk about conducting risk assessments. At the very start, I don't believe there's a single one that isn't in some way have some form of risk evaluation and quantification. But this standard here is about guidance for you in conducting risk assessments and managing risk within your organization. You can see the slide there. You can see all the things that are included within those diagrams on the slide, but a useful and I think an important document. And this document I think is a real foundation standard that it's really worth. If you're doing risk, make sure you read this standard. John, any more on that one before I move on?
Exactly that, Frank. It's an underpinning standard for a lot of the things we'll talk about today. And when we will come on to talk about environmental and governance and all of those areas, they all require some form of risk assessment. So if you want to put in place a good risk assessment process, have a look at 31,000.
And we wanted just to sort of put a few things here. Again, not a definitive list by any margin, but you can probably guess my favourite. But we want to give you some ideas about risk mitigation strategies that people might choose to deploy, and I'm not recommending any of them. And the other thing I'd say is, don't forget, mitigation strategies also bring in risk. So, risk, do an assessment of the mitigation strategies as well, because whatever you do will bring more risk. I quite often, when I look at risk in this area and the things you might like to do, and we can talk about multi-sourcing. The more people you can buy from, well, does that then help spread the risk of problems in your supply chain? Well, it might, but it also might cause you problems. Obviously, it's going to be my favourite one, partnerships and collaboration, which I believe are the right things to do. But that also brings risk, because you might be sharing your IP with people. You might be sharing report resources with other organisations. You might be talking much more closely to competitors. Creating stockpiles might sound good, but you've got to use them and you've got to pay for them. Onshoring. This might be an opportunity for many people out there in the UK who have in the past, when larger organisations have tended to offshore services and manufacturing. Maybe there's an opportunity to onshore them to provide a greater security risk. Look at sustainability challenge by not moving things all over the world. And then also getting better at understanding demand management, which again is a great mitigation strategy if you can deploy it. And of course, as we look at net zero and scope 3, I think organisations will all look, larger organisations, to look at things like onshoring, partnerships, improve forecasting to help them achieve those goals. John, anything more there?
No, I don't think so, Frank. I think there's some quite useful information on the DTI website, by the way, on a lot of supply chain mitigation strategies. So you might find some development of these thoughts there.
Excellent. So we're now going to move into sort of the second area, which is standards that can support you and your supply chain. So we'll look at partnering and collaboration and the standards that are associated with them. We're going to focus on two standards here, 37500 and 44001. And hopefully these will give you some good ideas. So outsourcing as a risk mitigation strategy is in VS ISO 37500. Published in 2014, covers the main phases of processes and governance. Gives guidance, so it is a guidance standard. And another one I would call a great enabling standard, and that it's it's really good in providing lots of reference material, deployment guidance, supports the effective deployment and achievement of the design goals of some of the other standards that we'll talk about as well as we go through here. It talks about flexibility of outsourcing requirements, accommodating changes in business and different business requirements. It also helps you identify the risks involved with outsources, and how to, if you like, move on to a more beneficial collaborative relationships. And certainly some of the people that I met and worked with on the ISO 44000 and before that BS 11000 committees were heavily involved in outsourcing and previous outsourcing standards as well. So there's a real synergy here between those standards. And as I said, I think this is a good base standard. It has a framework, and it's a sort of plan, do, check, act one. Not quite, I have to say, but it's sort of. It covers the main phases of process and looks at the governance aspects of outsourcing, independence of size, and it's independent of any size or sector or any industry or any commercial area. It provides guidance on good outside-in governance for the mutual benefit of client and provider, and that mutual benefit is a key thing, I think. It talks about the flexibility in outsourcing requirements, identifying risks, as I mentioned earlier, with outsourcing, and the standard is definitely designed to be tailored to meet different regulatory frameworks and different organizational sizes. And then, so you can see as we go through it, talk about the initiation and selection of here, the transition to new arrangements, looks about delivering value, which is a really important one, and we'll talk about delivering value a little later as well. It recognises that the various stakeholders will act separately in some phases of the outsourcing cycle. Nothing wrong with that. These are different organisations, so it takes quite a mature view there. And then it sort of then talks about, looking at your strategy and analysing that strategy. That's part of the check element of this cycle that you can then feed through into the initial selection to get better in the future. It's very much intended to be used by outsourcing clients, providers, practitioners, lots and lots of people. This standard contains an awful lot of information. As I said earlier, it's a real enabling standard, and one that if someone is outsourcing to you or you plan to outsource, take a look at this standard. It will be a great help to you. John, any more on that one?
Yeah, no, other than the fact that I realised late in life that I was a visual learner, and I've always found these models really useful, because if you've not addressed the subject before, you follow that model through, and it's a really good sort of checklist actually of outsourcing if you're going to adopt it, and also it's the same frameworks we'll show you later, as Frank said, apply to the others as well. They're just really good checklists for making sure you do the right things.
Yeah, I agree with that, John. And there is a process there. Are you initiating and selecting? Do you have good plans for transitioning? Is what you've done delivering value and working effectively? Are you measuring and checking it to make sure it is?
Yeah.
And as you go back through and then you have that governance system, which is in the centre in this particular model, with that governance process managing everything you're doing. And of course, feeding in at the side there is the strategy. Is all this working? And so it is fitting in with your strategy. So the model does help actually, if you like to look at them in that way. And now we're going to talk about my favourite standard, which is collaborative business relationships, ISO 44001. I think the benefits of working with others are obvious. It's almost impossible to think that. And I'm going to use a slightly different word here, that if you don't cooperate with people, it's very hard to think how you would make any progress in anything alone. But what 44001 does is it helps people move from cooperation to true value delivering collaboration. I tend to look at this as a structured collaborative working. Because it is putting that structure and that framework in place that provides the discipline, the rigor, and the framework, if you like, in which to move and build forward. I've seen over the years collaborative relationships when used in the right circumstance, and I would add that not all circumstances require a collaborative business relationship or right for a collaborative business relationship. But when they're used in the right circumstance, it really improves engagement between the various parties. It brings a much stronger, much more joined up process between the various parties involved. It absolutely improves the risk management process by having this joint approach to risk management. That doesn't mean to say you don't have an individual organizational approach to risk management, but you also share parts of the risk that go on, and it helps to enhance skills and build relationships that, in my view, are more sustainable. And we have seen over the years, not just in better commercial outcomes, but social value and the achievement of sustainability goals being realized and achieved by people working more effectively together, not as 2 or 3 or 4 organizations, but as one cohesive unit. And it really does help supply chains in critical areas to become more resilient. And who in our society of 2023 does not want a more resilient supply chain? And we have models, and John, you will probably talk better to these models than I will in a moment, but very, very quickly, the first model here really talks about the multi-dimensional relationship, and that's not easy to say at this time in the morning, trust me, of relationships, because your collaborative relationship could be with customers, it could be with external collaborators, it could be with suppliers, or it could be internal within your own organizational group that you're collaborating to achieve something. The greater majority of organizations, I'm afraid, who have adopted 44001 have done it because their customers wanted them to. So they essentially, their customers say, oh, let's collaborate with our suppliers because that will help us get more value, get closer to our key and critical suppliers and reduce and mitigate our risk. What we do see from some organizations is people using it to say, actually, we'd like to work more closely with you because we can give you a better service, and using it as a much more of an enterprise, a much more commercial approach. And we've definitely seen that with people working in large tenders in government areas such as in infrastructure and in defence. And of course, it does talk about all these things that go around collaboration, where you might, joint ventures, alliances, consortia, business ecosystems. I think Kinetic were one that set up some really interesting business ecosystems with the SME community in recent years. So the model there starts to describe the key areas that people might look at for the multidimensional relationships they might have. But of course, there's also a process here, competence and culture that really drive good collaborative working. So any management system consists of, to me, 4 key elements: systems, processes, competence, and culture. And 44001 is as important as any of those. And the model here talks about things such as being aware of the operational awareness, the knowledge, the internal assessment to make sure you know where you are in your capabilities, selecting the right partners. Partner selection is vital in all walks of life, of course. Then working together to create value, make sure that value is working and is being effective and being effectively reviewed so you stay together. And then at the end, an exit strategy, and that model works through the standards. And all those elements to come together in 44001. John, you will talk, I'm sure, much more about the model than I. I'm much better. Anything I've missed?
Well, you're setting me up, Frank, to fail, I think, but that's another issue.
Is there something new there, John?
No, not really. What I would say was, in terms of, just to emphasize what Frank was saying earlier, as a standard, I think this and the framework is meant to be for organizations to use really in some of their critical relationships. I wouldn't expect an organization to have collaborative relationships with all of their suppliers. but of course, I think collaboration and being collaborative is a good behaviour anyway in any situation in any walk of life. So I think that would apply to any relationship. But as a framework, it's really for critical suppliers, I think, and it's different to what some of the other standards we'll talk about in the sense that it just recognises that relationships have a life cycle. And I mean, and one of the key parts of this standard is actually thinking about exit from a relationship. So if you are going to get into a relationship and develop it, then actually one of the things to think about up front is, okay, what happens if it comes to an end? How do we manage that? And how do we manage that with our customers? How do we manage that with our suppliers? And what are the processes involved in thinking about that? So again, it's just a really good checklist taking you through the life cycle of a relationship from is it a good idea to making it work and then through to exiting it in the end. So very useful framework.
And I think we'll say a couple more words on this particular standard over the next couple of slides. But I think this is the first standard that we've talked about, and we're almost halfway through, that you can certify to. And if you want to demonstrate your organizational capability to work collaboratively with your supply chain partners, then that might be a way to do it.
Yeah,
and
I think sorry, Frank, I was just going to say, in terms of advising clients, I think one of the big things on the agenda at the moment is the whole issue of social value. So a lot of larger organizations are looking at 44,001 as a framework to help them work with their supply chains to address the issue of social value.
Yeah, Sellafield have done a lot of work in that area in the northeast, in the northwest. And actually, when you think about collective capability, we all have abilities. I have one, John has some, but hopefully getting us both together on this presentation together, us here, we create extra value, hopefully by working together like a good football team. So just think about how 44,001 might help you in your supply chain resilience. It will help you understand your risk profile. Understanding your risk profile rather is key, and we try other standards to help you do that, because that will tell you where and when you should partner with the right people. Selecting those partners, absolutely vital. Make sure you've got a good cultural fit. If you and your partner want completely different things, then that will not fit. Make sure you have the competence and your partner have the competence to work collaboratively. There's training available for that, but it's all about behaviours and creating the right culture as well. Understand what value is to you. So many people feel this is a good thing to do, but don't have a real clear vision of what value is. If you don't know what that value is, you won't achieve it. So be absolutely clear what value is. And value isn't always cheaper or faster or whatever. It might be safer. It might be in a more resilient way. It might be in a more sustainable way. Understand what that value is. And of course, what value is totally different today to many organizations, particularly to larger organizations, than it was 5 or 10 years ago. And then once you understand what partner value is, make sure your partner understands that. If they think that what you see as value is something different to what you do, they'll go off and try and help you in the wrong area. And then make sure that the organization that you partner with is willing and able, and that you are willing and able to help them achieve that value. So it is a win-win scenario. And it's achieved through good governance, through leadership, through joint management. SER is a senior executive responsible, through joint management teams with shared objectives, through joint planning and transparency between the organizations, through a joint risk management process. That's not at the exclusion of individual risk audit assessments that you'll do within your own organization, but sharing risk where it's pertinent to do so, through joint improvement teams, but most importantly, through displaying collaborative behaviours. So we thought we'd give you a quick 5-minute break now. John and I have a certain age, so we are unable to go for more than an hour without taking a quick comfort break. So we thought we'd give you a quick couple of minutes if you want to fill up your coffee pots, coffee cups, visit the bathrooms in your homes or wherever it is you are, and we'll be back in very shortly, 3 or 4 or 5 minutes maximum. Okay. John, Amy, are you both there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Just let me know when it appears that we've got everyone. I can't see everybody at the moment. I don't think John's back yet. As soon as John gets back, we'll rock and roll.
Yeah.
I'll just give it a few more seconds, Amy, and then I'll crack on.
Sounds good.
Okay, I think I'll move on. I'm sure John will join us back in a second, but I think I don't want us to overrun by too much. So if we move on to we're now going to talk about environmental sustainability and governance as in the next session. Move on. And these standards we're going to talk about in this section are standards that I'm sure many of you will have heard of these: ISO 9001, 14001, 27045, and 22301. So these are the key standards that we'll talk about in this next section. So 9001. In my view, and I've been working with it now for a long time, it forms the bedrock for the application of many other standards in organisations. Once you've got an effective 9001 system in place, adding all the others becomes easier. Now, I know it's been going a long time. In fact, it's almost as old as John is, to be honest. And it has only almost. And it has its weaknesses and its critics, but it is still the biggest utilised standard ever. It's designed and can be used by any organisation, large or small. It's used by over 1 million organisations in 170 countries, and trust me, I've seen quite a few of those. It's based on a number of quality management principles, and again, I talked earlier on about the principles being the fundamental bedrock to approaching those. And it requires a process approach to moving forward and continual improvement. And again, that's still that stepwise approach to improvement where you look at your policy, you set your objectives, you do a risk to evaluate what you really need to do, and you get on with achieving those objectives. Then once you've done that, you move to the next stage. It basically helps ensure that customers rather get consistent, good quality products or services, and that brings a lot of business benefits. And some of the benefits, and this stand's been going for over 40 years in one way or another. But what doesn't surprise me, but what I think is really gratifying is that organisations are still reporting benefits from it, even after all these years. It provides some key requirements in the purchasing process, which I think support supply chain resilience. And these include things such as, making sure that the purchase information you as a customer needs to provide to your supplier so they can clearly understand your needs, including any specific approvals and requirements that are needed, and confirm that they're there so you don't have an unexpected shock at the end. And of course, it also requires a supplier to be able to, before they accept your order and provide that commitment, to be able to meet your requirements, so you can place your order with confidence. 66% of organisations said that they improved the quality of their products by adopting ISO 9001. 60% said that they reduced the likelihood of mistakes, and 57% attracted new customers as a result of doing it. It really is a fundamental bedrock standard. So, you know, does having 9001, does adopting 9001 in your business, even if you don't, as John says, went for certification early on, it does having 9001 in your business help you deliver your products and services to your customers in a better way, and all the evidence we see indicates that it does. And of course, it then provides your confidence to your customers and to other stakeholders on your ability, your organizational ability to deliver what you say you'll deliver consistently. Personally, and it is a personal view, I would be very reluctant to use a key supplier that did not have a good ISO 9000 management system in place. John, anything more on that one before I move to the model?
No, I think I'm just conscious of time, Frank, but I think you said something very early on that is key, and that is having an effective system. So many people do not adopt these standards, and not just 9000, but the other ones we're going to talk about, in an effective way. They do it because somebody's asked them to do it in a contract, and in doing that way, they fail to get the real benefits and actually make it more bureaucratic than they need to. So I think the key is having an effective system.
Yeah, excellent. That's the model, plan, do, check out. We talked about these before. I hate the fact it uses the word continuous and not continual, but that's the model we've got. And we've got a case study here. We just wanted to, you know, give you some case studies as we go through some of these standards. This is Fairford Medical, an SME operating in the healthcare sector. They are a growing business, and as a growing business, as you all know, I'm sure on this call, they face many, many challenges. And those issues, those challenges they face were their driving force in their decision to invest time and money into adopting ISO 9001. It also allowed them, though, to be recognised by the relevant NHS framework. So they got the opportunity to tender for more clients. And as a result of providing that confidence, they had an increase in the work and the business opportunities that they got. So it really helped their business to move forward. I'll move forward because we are a little behind on the schedule. Oops. I wonder if I can make it work. Moving on to 14001 for environmental management system. Again, in my view, in my opinion, any organisation who is serious about addressing the sustainability challenge we face should be using 14001 as a base standard. And on that, you can build on your sustainability initiatives. It gives a great framework, it's adaptable, and it can be tailored to any specific circumstances that you might have. Again, it's plan, do, check, act, focus. It can, and we've seen examples, save you money. It can improve your brand and your reputation, say something about you as an organisation. Only a minority of organisations in the UK have 14001. It helps engage with employees, builds resilience against uncertainty, and can help your organisation rapidly adapt to change. And I think it's an absolute key thing in helping any organisation move to net zero. To me, it's the key platform for getting there. If you're moving to net zero, then 14001 really should be your first staging point in getting there, because you can then build on that moving forward. Just to talk a little bit about the standard, it requires an evaluation of impacts, and this is a form of risk assessment. It doesn't actually say it in the standard, it's clear as that, but it is a form of risk assessment. And it requires you to make an evaluation, which actually means quantify, doesn't it? And the impacts that you make into the environment, and these can be many faceted. It requires you to take a critical and hard look at your activities, the impacts on the environment of those activities, and then you have to in some way quantify and categorize them. They can be all sorts of things, water stress and pollution, soil contamination, biodiversity, energy use, atmospheric pollution, waste, noise and light, use of resources, land use, change and deforestation. And atmospheric pollution isn't just about those nasty black things coming out the chimney. It can be your carbon emissions as well. And of course, you need to work on the ones that and mitigate the most serious ones. It's a very good thing to recycle paper. I do it all the time. If you're sending carbon dioxide or lots of noxious gases out into the atmosphere in significant quantities, then you won't be achieving the requirements of 44,001 if you just recycle your paper. So it really requires organisations to think about doing something different. And yet another PDCA model. Every committee seems to want to write something different. John, would you like to talk about this particular one?
As you said earlier, Frank, it's just based around the plan, do, check cycle. Plan to do something, do it, check that you've done it, and then continually improve and go around that model continuous times. I think it's worth just recognising that as part of this, it also addresses the needs of gets you to address the needs of stakeholders, because in your environmental system, it's vital. And indeed, some of the other standards require you to think about the wider impact, and that would, of course, involve your supply chain and your suppliers in that as part of that interested parties bit. But like 9001, those people, well, certainly those people who've adopted it through BSI, have got significant benefits. A lot of it is to do with compliance. 76% say it helps them address compliance issues, but 60% say it's inspired trust in their business. So that's a key supply chain and supply chain resilience issue if you're inspiring trust. And 57%, nearly 60%, have said it's helped them reduce waste and ongoing defects. I was just going to pick up here a comment that somebody's made in the chat. I'm not sure I actually understand this, but apparently it's they think it's a great way of addressing Scope 3 issues in achieving net zero and decarbonisation. So its application is many and varied.
I would agree with them. I think that unless you fully do that evaluation that we talked about earlier of the effects that you have on the environment, and then look right back into your supply chain to do that, then you will not address Scope 3. And I think 14,001, as I said earlier, gives the absolute framework. The person who wrote that is bang on right. And then moving on, John, because I think we are.
Yeah.
We had just one case study that we picked up. I think this is available on the BSI website, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And this was an organisation called Shades of Comfort. And they said, put simply, we have gained not only prestigious contracts, but also credibility and confidence in the workplace as a result of our 9,000 and 14,001 certificates, adopting and demonstrating they've used those standards. And that was Tony Peters, their Sales and Marketing Director of Shades of Comfort, which is a nice endorsement. I'm sure there are others on the website as well if you want to take a look at them. Moving on, we wanted to talk to you a little bit about ISO 27001 for information security. Well, we all know about the risks. It's never been a more important topic. You hear about it every single day. And I don't think there's a day goes by without someone that doesn't phone me up or send me a text, or I get well, hopefully most of the time the emails get intercepted, but someone doesn't try to do something to scam me. And 27001 is all about helping you protect yourself both from scammers, but also for other sources of risk that will try to cause you problems in your organization. And of course, these attacks have become more and more prevalent and more sophisticated, and the supply chains become more and more complex, and the amount of information handled by a different number of organizations, the weak spots in that, the number of opportunities and interfaces for people to get at that data grow all the time. So 27001 is a framework standard. It is a requirement standard, as I mentioned earlier, and you can gain certification to it if you wish. But nonetheless, that and then the guidance that sits in the standards around it are really great sources of information on how you can protect your organization, and also how you can make sure that your supply chain partners if they are privy to your information or you need to share it with them for different things, can mitigate the info security risks, and then as a result, reduce the risk of disruption and to protect your intellectual property, either internally or if you share it with other people. And an ISO 27000 and the adoption of this standard will clearly send a clear signal to your customers, your clients, your employees, and other stakeholders that you are serious about this topic. And when we think about ISO 27001, we all think, I certainly think, it's all about information in the digital environment, you know, paper, cloud-based. But 27001 isn't just about that. It's about paper-based and other forms of information as well that you might have. It does get you to improve your resilience to cyber attacks, but it doesn't just stop there. As with all other standards, and you can read this slide as well as I can, but as well as all of the standards that we've talked about, it is risk-based. And then, so what happens here again, and the standard will take you through this process, that initial risk assessment you do will help you identify where to focus your efforts to get the maximum benefit and address the maximum areas of risk in your organization. And of course, one of the things that 27001 does, of course, is it enables you to integrate these things into your other management systems that you'll have on site. So you have a clear integrated system, so you people do the right things, not because it meets a particular standard, but because that's the way in this business we do the right things. And it protects all, hopefully helps you protect the integrity and confidentiality of the data that you have. Some of the benefits that we've seen, 80% of the people we asked said it inspired trust in their business by others. 75% said us it clearly protected business, reduced business risk, and 71 felt it clearly protected their business. And once again, although probably currently the fastest growing standard from a certification perspective, so more and more organizations are picking this up than any other standard in terms of speed, still the greater minority of organizations have gone for certification. Hopefully lots more have picked this standard up and used it to help them improve their businesses. And I think we have a case study here from Costain, I know very well. They've deployed 27001 and they've said that, you know, as a result of doing this, their security incidents have decreased by 72% since 2010. John, any more on 27001? I went through fairly quickly.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just very quickly, one is the standard gives you a whole list of potential controls to use when you've identified the risk. So it's a very useful document in that sense. And secondly, it does address and recognise the fact that people are probably the biggest risk to information security that there is in an organisation.
Yeah.
That's it.
It's probably not just an information security, but never mind. Let's move on to health and safety. The very first standard I got involved in, well, other than 9000, it's a health and safety is clearly a critical issue. Accidents, particularly serious ones at your locations or those of your supply chain partners, can seriously disrupt supply chains. And there's no doubt that having an effective management system in place, and 45001 provides that, reduces the risk of accidents and as a result of disruption. And of course, accidents cause enormous reputational damage. And don't forget, they can also be the consequence, you know, poor health and safety can also result in poor health as well. And you know, the other thing is, we have a moral responsibility that everybody who works in your organization or in your supply chain has the right to go home from work at the end of the working day, healthy and uninjured every day. Now, in the UK, we've got good and strong regulation, but don't forget that is not the case everywhere. And I've seen some interesting things around the world assessing this standard. A good occupational health and safety management system will help you manage your regulatory duties as well, so you actually hopefully stay in compliance with the law. Now, the figures that I've got on the screen there, the 2.3 million people, 6,000 deaths a day, are global figures. Here in the UK, we all know that our health and safety has improved enormously as a nation, and we have numbers nowhere near that level. I would argue that having a good health and safety management system in place, which has been driven a lot by our regulatory framework in the UK, but also by standards like 45,001, have really helped us get to where we are. And so we don't have numbers like they have in other countries here because of those doing those good things. And 45,001 has now been in place in one form or another. We first brought 18,001 out in 1999, so I've been around about 24 years or practically now. So we've been following the good requirements here for a long, long time. I would urge all of you who have people working in their organizations to pick this up if you haven't done already, and see how it can help you both meet your regulatory requirements and also to stay accident free and keep your people safe all the time. And there's lots of benefits for using 45,001. Increases organizational resilience through proactive risk prevention, innovation, and then continuing improvement. Strengthening your legal and compliance demonstrates the responsibility that you and your brand taking in health and safety, and looking at it because it does fit all businesses of all sizes. And we have yet another variation on what is essentially the same plan, do, check, act model. Starting here very nicely with context of the organization, which is interesting and useful because all organizations have a different context, talking about both internal and external issues, the needs and expectations of interested parties, and there are different interested parties involved in health and safety, but you'll see the same plan, do, check, act model leading to improvement and leading to continual improvement, producing good intended outcomes here. And of course, the intended outcome is not accidents and good health of people, but it is based on the same principles and the same model in underpin 9001 and 14,001. And of course, as a result of that, helps you build this into a good integrated system. I have to say, when I worked in the certification sector, and this was one of my products, many organizations found it much easier to do 14,001, 18,001 as part of the same project, because there's so many things that are aligned and are similar. And we have a case study here from the Port of Lerwick, who said that ISO 45,001 plan placed health and safety at the heart of their organisation, assisted with hazard identification, critical component of health and safety, risk management, and requiring continual improvement, expose their business to external audit and improve their senior management and board oversight of what they were doing. One of my favourite standards of all time. I think it's done an enormous amount of good. I will say that because it was one of my babies early on, but really one with such great motivation, and it's got a lot of really good guidance in there that will help you as well. John, anything more you'd like to say on?
No, it's just, I think it's about reputation, and many of the high profile cases in the UK that have hit the press and damaged the reputation of UK companies is actually come from health and safety issues in their supply chain. So, you know, in what we're talking about in terms of supply chain resilience, I think it's absolutely crucial.
Thank you, John. Yeah, I agree totally. We'd now like to talk to you very quickly about 22301 for business continuity. In this area, it's probably one of the most recent ones we'll be talking about today. One of the most recently brought in, and this is very much about anticipating problems and ensuring systems are in place to mitigate them. A really good thing to do. Requires, I have to say, COVID-19 tested many organisations' business continuity plans. And pulling that business continuity plan and looking at 22301 will help you understand and prioritise the threats that your business faces, and then will help you to, once you've identified them, protect and reduce the likelihood of them occurring, and as a result, ensure your business recovers from those disruptive incidents. Again, it's really important to make sure that your business continuity plans are relevant to and in relation to your critical supply chain partners, or if you are part of somebody else's critical supply chain, that they are aware that you have a good BCP in place, because that will give them confidence. And it's been implemented and it's tested. And And again, it's a risk-based standard. So what you need to do is it will help you understand and prioritize the threats. So you put your your resources into the right area. Again, through a risk assessment process, and the things we talked about before all apply here. And of course, all these major standards, excuse me, adopt the same basic methodology for managing risks and then taking action after subsequently. And the standard itself talks about reducing the likelihood of adverse effects. And then once those effects occur, how do you mitigate them to come back to normal running as quickly as possible? So a good business continuity system in place will and should help you reduce the frequency of impact of disruptions. Absolutely should help you return to business as quickly as possible. Sets clear expectations and help you improve your supply chain relationships that you might have by demonstrating that you're not the weak link in that supply chain. It could, if you, and I'm not saying everybody has, but it could and should, in my view, help you reduce insurance premiums. Should help you improve your reputation if you let people know about it, which could help you win new business. And also helps you deal with change when it happens. And as I said earlier, the only thing that is certain is uncertainty. And fundamentally for me, I think this can help you build stakeholder confidence and trust in your organization with your customers. And I'm sorry to say, yet another variation on what is essentially the same model here. Again, it's plan, do, check, act. All of these feature on the same model. And although they all talk about it slightly differently, it's the same process. And so these systems can be very, very easily integrated together into your management systems. And then Letter Gold, another a case study we picked up. I think all these are on the website. New market-based Letter Gold Plastics is a growing SME. At the time of this, they employed 25 staff. I bet they employ more now. They're an engineering company that specialises in injection moulding, contract packaging for domestic water in particular. And above all, they say it has reinforced the confidence of customers seeking certainty of supply from Letter Gold. So they demonstrated or felt they got real benefits from looking at that. John, any more on business continuity from yourself?
Yeah, no, I don't think so, Frank.
Excellent. Okay, so 49. So just to sort of move now as we're coming towards the end, when you look to validate systems, how can you demonstrate to people that you're adopting these standards and you're showing best practice, or how can you look to others who are in your supply chain and you deem to be critical that they are doing that? Well, some of them can be as simple as just getting a declaration of conformity as part of your agreements with them as separate addendums, that they are following the requirements of these standards and they have robust systems and that they conduct internal audits of themselves and the like. You can look to get people to go and audit your critical suppliers against the requirements of some of these standards. You can pick elements of them if you want to suit a match, but you can get second-party audits done that on your behalf by expert organisations in doing this to give you that additional level of assurance. Or you can look at third-party certification, often referred to as a registration, and of course the ones we've talked about in the last section, 914, 45, 44, 22301, 27001, all have system certification schemes with a considerable number of certification bodies around the world offering them there. Product certification I'll talk about in a moment, if I may. And of course, you can get test reports as well from organisations that might give you levels of confidence. So there are ways that you can validate that and ways to help you secure your supply chain and gain confidence from it, or provide confidence to others in your ability, all based on standards. And of course, product standards do provide an assurance regarding the performance and or the safety of the products. And the product standards that are out there cover an absolute multitude of products and almost every industry sector. And of course, they are also now starting to cover services that people provide as well. So lots and lots of product standards out there. So if those products form part of your critical supply chain, and the failure of those products when they're incorporated maybe into final products that you will send out or other component parts that you may send out could result in failure and damage to your business by its reputation or claims made if it's identified, then getting the product that is certified or validated to the right standard for its quality, performance, or safety is a key thing. So make sure you're specifying the right ones. And standards, of course, underpin all of these things here. There are a number of marks out there, and there's just a few of them. One thing I would say to you, you'll say, well, he would say that because he spent so long in the industry. If it's really important to you, try and make sure it's a Type 5 scheme. In my view, a Type 5 scheme is the gold label scheme. When I wanted to buy a riding safety helmet for my young daughter some years ago, because I know about these schemes, when I went to that store, I made sure that the riding helmet I made was approved under a Type 5 scheme. And the Type 5 scheme is defined in 17067. It means that product was independently selected. It was independently tested. The system that supported its manufacture was a robust one with a management system in place that was tested. And that products were sampled on a regular basis after that, at least every year, to make sure they continued to pass the test. And again, that testing was independent, and that management system that underpinned them was still in place. And when my daughter fell off that horse, she was not injured. And I remember the gentleman in the hospital telling me, the doctor in the hospital telling me, it was due to the quality of the equipment that she'd had. So it's important to you, make sure you buy products that have a Type 5 scheme. Moving on, we in BSI collaborate with lots and lots of other organisations to make sure that the UK stays at the forefront of standards development, and that benefits UK PLC. And those are just some of the documents, some of the other organisations that we work with there. And I think, Amy, I think you mentioned some of these at the very start anyway. And we are proud to be the UK's national standards body. And you can tell I'm still proud because even though I don't work here, I said I am proud. And we collaborate to make sure that the UK is at the forefront of standards making with all these other organisations. And we are, of course, proud that so many British standards are being adopted as ISO standards. Almost every one of those standards, actually every one of those standards that I talked about in the last section had been a BS before it was an ISO. And that's a real achievement for us as a standards organisation. So just to finish off with a couple of points for you there. Reasons why you should join BSI. Well, you can read them as well as mine. My voice is starting to go anyway now after talking to you for over an hour. But lots of other organisations have. We have a great pedigree and a great history. We are recognised as the NSB and the work we do with government and government agencies. We work with lots of other standards makers. We are signatories to the World Trade Organization. And I believe that standards are absolutely crucial to the success of the UK and of business overall. If you'd like further sources of information, there's a couple for you there. And you already, I think this group already can access BSO online. It's a fantastic source of knowledge. Please make good use of it. I think there's very little time for questions and discussion. I don't think there's anything in the chat. John, I don't think there's anything you would like to say, but I think that if there are any questions that you have afterwards, there's a sort of address here that you can use to gain more information. Amy, I don't know if you'll say more on that. John and I are both, I think, really enjoyed speaking to you this morning. We hope you found it interesting. If you've got any questions for us individually, you can write to me at my email address is there. John, anything you'd like to finish off before we hand back to Amy?
I think if you've got queries, perhaps in the first place, that UK Edge Toolkit email is a great place to send an email to. All I would say is I think on the getting involved in standards, a lot of organisations use standards as a way of sort of getting their place and making sure that their place in the marketplace is assured by ensuring that the standards are reflect the goods and services that they provide. So please encourage, if you can, your clients to get involved in the whole process of standardization. The standards committees are they would welcome input, because the quality of the standards is dependent on the quality of the input. So please encourage wherever you can people to get involved in this process.
Thank you, John. Amy, back to you.
Yeah, so thanks, Frank and John. I hope everyone found that useful today. We would really appreciate if you take some time just at the end to complete a feedback survey, just so we can hear how the course was useful, if there's any areas we can improve on or add to help make it more useful. We'll just put a link in the chat to the survey if you can complete that before you leave. And yes, so we'll be circulating the slides and a recording of the session to you following this, just so you have a record of everything. And yeah, as Frank said, happy if there's any other questions or comments or anything you want to speak about, to either email Frank or the general inbox. And so I guess, yeah, if there's nothing else, if no one wants to have any questions, then enjoy your day.
Very much. Thank you.
Cheers all. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so
Bye-bye.
much.